You need a scissors, not a...
Okay, here we are with day 4. Hallelujah. Yes. And we're having a good time. We had a great outreach yesterday out in front of a college, talked to a lot of people. And today we did a little teaching on the atonement. Lectures yesterday were leading up to this about how the atonement is a substitution for penalty. And so God is able to maintain the same reasons that he needed to punish people, but without punishing them. And so the atonement is a brilliant reflection on the mind of God and also his goodness and his character and his love for us and the influence it's supposed to have upon us. And so we ended with the conclusion that Christ died for everyone, making salvation available for everyone, but automatic for no one. So we can share the gospel with everyone. Now we're going to talk about the cause of the death of Christ, the medical reasons that Jesus died. Okay. So for this lecture, I'm going to be, for the most part, we have about 40 minutes. So I'm going to be sharing almost directly out of a book that I've been writing on the atonement. And this is on the medical cause of the death of Christ. Like, you know, I'll write it here. The medical cause of what killed Jesus. Now, the atonement, according to the Bible, consisted in, the wounding and bruising of Christ. As he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities in Isaiah 53:5. But the same section, Isaiah 53:3-6, talks about the agony of his soul, which you don't hear a lot of people talk about. You know, when you think of the crucifixion and the death of Christ, you think of the whipping, you think of, the nails in his hands, the nails that are in his feet. But the Bible talked in many different passages about the agony of his soul, that his soul would be made an offering for sin. Isaiah 53:4 says that he's borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. And so the atonement and the suffering of Christ was more than just physical. It was also emotional. That there was not just physical suffering that Christ was going through. There was emotional suffering that Christ was going through. Isaiah 53:10 says that God would make his soul an offering to sin, and also that God would put him to grief. So there's the idea of grief. So a great part of his atonement consisted in the travail of his soul, in the agony of his mind. Even going back to the Garden of Gethsemane. If you look in Luke 22:44, I'll write some of the key verses here. Okay, Isaiah 53 talks about the agony of soul and his grief and sorrow. Luke 22:44 says this. It says, "And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was, as it were, great drops of blood falling down to the ground." So here in the Garden of Gethsemane, the suffering of Christ is beginning of agony of soul, which Isaiah talked about as being part of the atonement. I'm going to quote from some medical doctors, because I'm not one, and we're talking about the medical cause of the death of Christ. A Dr. C. Truman Davis, medical MD, said, "Under great emotional stress, tiny capillaries in the sweat glands can break, thus mixing blood with sweat." Another Dr. Mark Eastman, medical MD, said the notion that someone could actually sweat blood seems contrived. However, there are rare but recognized conditions called hematohydrosis, in which capillary blood vessels that feed the sweat glands rupture, causing them to express blood. This usually occurs under conditions of extreme physical or emotional stress. And so it's very interesting that before anyone ever laid any hand on Christ, before anyone touched him, he's now under such great agony of his heart and of his mind, so much so that he said in Mark 14:33, until verse 34, he said, and he taketh with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be sore amazed, to be very heavy. And he said unto them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful unto death. And you see the same thing in Matthew 26:37 to 38. Essentially the same thing. He said he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee and began to be sorrowful and very heavy. Then saith he unto them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death. So far we saw in Isaiah that talked about the agony of his soul being made an offering to sin. Then under such great agony, he began to sweat drops of blood. Now this agony has gotten to the point where he's saying, I'm going to die. My soul is sorrowful even unto death. In other words, I am in such emotional agony, it's going to kill me. So we read, like, for example, in Luke 21:26. That men's hearts would fail them for fear. You can die just from stress. You can die just from fear and emotional agony. It can literally kill you. Jesus was not using hyperbole or exaggerating when he said, my soul is sorrowful even unto death. One writer, J. Rambach, said he began to be sore amazed, which word in the original denotes the most painful anguish of soul and depression of spirit. The chief seat of his agony was his soul, which was subject to the like passions of ours. And this sorrow was unto death. That is, it was so great that it might have broken his heart and thus brought on his death. In other words, Jesus could have died right then and there in the garden. Before he ever made it to Calvary, before he ever made it to the cross, he said, my soul is sorrowful even unto death. That's how intense the agony of his soul really was. Dr. Priestley said the agony of Christ affected him so much that it would not have been extraordinary if he had died in consequence of it, since such consternations and terror as he appears to have been is well known to have been of itself the cause of death to many persons. Now, Jesus said in Matthew 26:39, and he prayed, let's see, maybe I didn't write it down. Matthew 26:39. Yeah, I'll write that on the board. 26. Oh, okay, so I want 39 now. 26, 39. Well, that's a good point. So let's start back in verse 37. It says, and he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee and began to be sorrowful and very heavy. So that's emotional. And then he said unto them, my soul, and the soul is the seat of emotions, the seat of passion. My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here and watch with me. And he went a little further, and he fell on his face, and he prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but thine be done. Jesus prayed for this cup to pass from him. This is in the present tense. He's not saying a future cup, but a cup that he's now drinking. In other words, this agony of soul that made him sweat great drops of blood, that now he might actually die from, his soul is sorrowful even unto death. Now he's praying, let this cup, what he's now enduring, let this cup pass from me. Now, a lot of times, you think he's talking about the cross. Let that cup pass from me. Oh, if it's possible, let me avoid the cross. But would that really make any sense when Jesus prophesied the Son of Man must be lifted up? He knew it was going to happen. He prophesied that it must happen. His whole life was based on him coming for that to happen. And now at the last moment, Jesus cowards and says, if possible, let me avoid that. Would that make any sense? When there have been like Christian martyrs who have gone without flinching to the cross. They've gone willing to the flames. So would it make sense for Jesus to pray for that cup to be removed? No. What the cup he's praying about is this present agony that almost killed him in the garden. And I'll show you more proof of that. We read in Hebrews 5:7. Hebrews 5:7 says, who in the days of his flesh, when he offered up prayers and supplications with strong praying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard, in that he feared. So this is talking about Jesus praying in the garden with great tears and supplication, and it's saying that he was heard. Now that word heard means more than just God was listening. The Greek word means to give heed to comply with the admonition, to obey, to assent to, and to have the request granted. That means that when Jesus prayed, let this cup pass from me, God said, okay. God answered that prayer. A lot of people, when you have the idea that he's praying to avoid the cross, that, he said, let this cup pass from me, but not my will. And it was God's will for that cup not to pass, and so God didn't answer that prayer. But that's not what Hebrews 5:7 is saying. God is saying, it's saying that God answered that prayer. He got the request that he wanted. I have a long, long quote I'm not going to read. So the idea here then, Jesus was not praying to avoid the cross. Jesus was praying to get to the cross. Because what if he had died there in the garden from such agony of grief and soul? It would not have been the public display that it needed to be. It would have been a private affair. Would have been a private matter. And remember, punishment needed to be public to communicate ideas of what God was like. Punishment must be public. Well, if Jesus died privately, it wouldn't have the needed effect. So Jesus here is praying in the garden, my soul is sorrowful even unto death. I'm going to die right here. My soul is in such grief, I'm going to die in the garden. And God, let this cup pass from me. And then it says his request was given. So that cup he was enduring was taken away. That's why when the soldiers came, remember they came and they said, where's Jesus? We're here for Jesus. He says, I am him. That grief and agony is gone. Now he's composed. He's back to his normal self, because that cup was taken away. That cup of grief, that cup of agony, that cup of emotional torment had been taken away. J. Rambach said, it must have been a petition in which he was heard, which cannot be said if he prayed for the removal of all of his sufferings in general. Dr. William Stroud, who's a medical doctor who wrote a really exhaustive book on the medical cause of the death of Christ, he said, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Christ endured mental agony so intense that had it not been limited by divine interposition, it would have probably destroyed his life without the aid of any suffering. But having been thus mitigated, its effects were confined to the violent palpitations of the heart accompanied with bloody sweat. Now on the cross, this agony was renewed in conjunction with the ordinary sufferings incidental to the mode of punishment. And having at this time been allowed to proceed to its utmost extremity without restraint, occasioned by the sudden death by ruptured heart, imitated by a discharge of blood and water from his side, when it was afterwards pierced. Now we're getting into more of the issue, what is the medical cause of the death of Christ? We read in Luke 23:46. Luke 23:46, that Jesus cried out right before his death, "Into thy hands I commit my spirit." And then he died. Now, when someone dies of crucifixion, do you know how they die? Lack of oxygen. That's right. That's why they break the legs. That's exactly right. Death by crucifixion is death by suffocation. The weight of your own body literally pressures and crushes your lungs so you can't breathe. So you have to take a big stretch with your legs to relieve the pressure, just to take a breath. Well, if Jesus cried out moments before his death, Jesus did not die of suffocation. And if Jesus did not die of suffocation, he did not die from crucifixion. So what killed Jesus? What was the medical cause of the death of Christ? It was not suffocation by crucifixion, the normal mode of death by a cross. We saw the same thing in Matthew 27:50. Just put it here. It says, Jesus cried out with a loud voice. Okay, it's not that he had just a tiny little bit of breath before he was suffocating. Okay, he cried out with a loud voice. So his lungs were just fine. His lungs were not suffocated. Bert Thompson, who is a PhD, and also another person named Brad Harub, they wrote a book on, or at least a paper on this. They said the ability of Christ to cry out with a loud voice indicates that asphyxiation was probably not the major causative factor of his death. Jesus died, here's the point, Jesus died before the cross could kill him. Something other than the cross killed him. Normally, death by crucifixion would take at 3 to 5 days, sometimes even up to 2 weeks, to be killed by the cross. Jesus was on the cross for 6 hours. Something else killed Jesus. Okay, when Pilate was told that Jesus died in just 6 hours, in Matthew 15:43, or was that Mark? That's Mark 15:43. To, 44. Pilate was surprised. He was taken back. This is a man who was an expert at crucifixion. At times, the Romans would crucify thousands a day. Thousands a day! The Romans, crucifixion was invented by the Persians, but it was perfected by the Romans. Pilate, who had crucified countless, thousands of people, no doubt, knew all about crucifixion, how long it takes for them to die. And now, after just 6 hours, Jesus is killed, and they come and they say, Jesus is dead. Is he dead already? Pilate is surprised. Because something other than the cross killed him. In John 19:33, same thing. Shows that, I'll just read it here. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was dead already, they broke not his legs. But one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith came there out blood and water. Okay, why were they going to break the legs? Do you remember? Pilate said to break the legs. The Sabbath is coming. You can't have a man on the cross on the Sabbath. So they would break the legs before the Sabbath came, because then you can't relieve your lungs. You die faster by suffocation. You can't take a breath. So you die, instead of taking days to die, a crucified man with broken legs would maybe die in minutes. And so they came to Jesus, but they didn't break his legs. As the prophecy said, his bones would not be broken because he was already dead. So the soldiers seemed a bit surprised that he was dead already, as if they didn't believe it. Is he faking? Is he pretending? So they pierced his side to make sure, just to make sure that he really was dead. And this is what you would call mortem evidence. You know, you have an autopsy when somebody dies to see what was the cause of death. You cut up the body and take a look at what fundamental organ, you know, failed to see what was the cause of death. Well, we don't have an official autopsy of the body of Christ, but we have an unofficial one. We have the piercing of his side. This is post-mortem evidence. What happened when they pierced his side? They saw what appeared to be blood and water flowing out of his side. Now, for many, many hundreds of years, they took that just to be a miracle. Blood, water flowing out of his side, that's a miracle. But I think it can be a bit more scientific and medical. Okay, let me explain something to you. There's in your heart, and I don't know how to draw a heart. There you go. That works, doesn't it? Okay, so there's your heart pumping in, you know, your blood. Well, there's a very thin layer on the outside of your heart full of fluid, just a little bit of fluid. It keeps your heart moist. And this is called the pericardium sac. Okay, you know, like the Greek word for heart is cardia, and para is with, so pericardia means like with your heart. So this is a sac that's with your heart. Now, if a soldier pierced a normal heart like you or my heart, just pierced it, what's going to come out the wound? Just blood. Just blood. There is a little bit of serum here, but not much. It wouldn't even be noticed. It would get mingled in with the blood, that only blood would come out. But that's not the condition of the heart of Jesus when he died. On the other hand, there's been cases where a person's heart from agony literally ruptures. The muscle, under such violent palpitations of the heart, rips and tears. And this little sac outside of the heart starts filling with blood. And so, apparently there's been cases where this pericardium sac, I don't know the exact measurement, but, like I think it's up to like a quart. What's bigger, a pint or a quart? A quart, right? Yeah, something like the pericardium sac in other cases have been known to hold up to a quart of blood. That's enormous amount of blood. But then you know what happens after time? There's something called coagulation, where the serum in your heart starts separating from the red blood cells. So you have a clear liquid over here, the serum, and then the red blood cells. So it starts separating. So if you were to pierce a heart that died from cardiac rupture, is the medical cause, after a period of time, if the person had been dead for a while, that this coagulation process would have happened, then you would have a separation between the red blood cells and the clear serum, so that you would see blood and water, or at least what would appear to be blood and water flowing out of his side. Now, it coagulated, so it's not going to just mingle back together again, like this would have mingled together. It's already been separated. So you would see, now it was enough for the Apostle John to notice. It wasn't just a little bit. I mean, it was a significant amount that from a distance, he could see it. And see, well, here's the clear stuff and here's the red stuff. Significant amount that he could see. So the post-mortem evidence that we have here is that Jesus died of a broken heart from this agony he was experiencing before he even went to the cross. From the agony that almost killed him when he was in the garden, was then revived. And what Jesus died from was a broken heart. So you could say Jesus died on the cross, but not by the cross, at least not by the normal method of crucifixion, of suffocation. Now, no doubt the suffering of the cross contributed to the whole agony of his mind. And the cross was a contributing factor, but he didn't die from suffocation. He died from a broken heart. And so there's been many cases where people have died from ruptured hearts, cardiac rupture. Actually, the cardiac rupture then leads to cardiac failure. Once the pericardium sac fills with blood, the heart can no longer function normal and the heart fails. So cardiac rupture leads to cardiac failure. And so that's the medical consensus, is that Jesus died of a ruptured heart. Here, Dr. William Stroud, MD, said the effusion of blood and water from the side of Christ, whereof no satisfactory solution can be otherwise given, is fully explained by the rupture of his heart. The blood and the water which flowed from the side of Christ when pierced by the soldier's spear were the result of a previous infusion into the pericardia sac of a quantity of blood, which had there separated into serum, and the counterpart is called crasamentum, and was derived from rupture of heart induced by violent action of the heart owing to agony of mind. And then I have a lot more quotes from other medical doctors. But it's interesting here. So the scriptures were fulfilled in the death of Christ, where it says, reproach has broken my heart. That's in Psalms 69, 20-21. I'll read the whole thing. Reproach has broken my heart. So this idea of Jesus actually had a broken heart. I mean, we use it as like an expression of just emotional pain, but it's a real thing. A broken heart is a real thing from agony. Here the psalm is saying, reproach has broken my heart, and I am full of heaviness, and I looked for some to take pity, but there was none. For the comforters, but I found none. They gave me gall for my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. See, so we know this psalm is talking about Christ in Matthew 27, 34. In Matthew 27, 34, they offered gall and vinegar to Christ. And as the second part of the psalm applies to Christ, then so also does the first part of the psalm, that reproach has broken my heart. So what killed Jesus? I believe the sin of the world literally killed Jesus. It wasn't just crucifixion as a physical thing. The hatred of the world, the rejection of the world, the sin of the world brought such emotional agony to his heart and his mind that his heart ruptured and he died as a consequence to this grief. I mean, what a thing to think. Jesus died of a broken heart. Jesus died from a broken heart. Now, I'm not like coming out of left field with this. Many theologians, Albert Barnes, said the death of Christ was doubtless hastened by the intense agony of the garden and the special sufferings endured as an atonement for the sin on the cross. Jonathan Edwards Sr. said that the sufferings Jesus endured while on the cross, quote, broke his heart. Charles Spurgeon, he said, our Lord died of a broken heart. Because of the agony that he suffered, it sufficed to lacerate the heart until it broke. George Otis Jr. said, Jesus took the sin of the whole world deep into his heart and mind. The anguish of his soul reached unbearable proportions. He did not die of crucifixion, but rather from internal agony of his soul. He died as a result of a voluntary identification, the sin of the world crushing out his life. Gordon Olson, old YWAM teacher, one of my favorites, he said the atonement of Christ was to consist in our blessed Lord taking the sins of the world into his holy heart and reliving the awfulness in his mind until his human strength overcame an unspeakable agony. He died of a broken or a ruptured heart and not from the crucifixion, as evidenced by the blood and the water which came from his side when pierced by the soldier. Another Reverend Archibald McLean said his soul was thus sorrowful even unto death. It was a deadly sorrow and the sorrows of death, and this sorrow seems actually to have killed him before the time in which the tortures of the could have affected his death. And so, Jesus said, like in John 10:17, no man takes my life, but I lay it down of my own accord. And so it was not what sinful men did to Jesus. But this agony, this cup that was given to him by the Father, that he began to drink in the garden, that he prayed for release from, but was revived again on the cross. The cup of the Father that he drank, this agony of heart and agony of soul, is what killed and took the life of Christ. So that Isaiah 53 is literally fulfilled. His soul was made an offering for sin. Not just the suffering of his body, but the suffering of his soul. Isaiah 53:12 says, he has poured out his soul onto death. Isaiah 53:12. So he said, my soul is sorrowful even unto death. And then it says he poured out his soul onto death. Jesus died of agony of soul. Gordon Olson again said, the suffering of Christ from a broken heart over the world's sin during a brief duration of time unto death were substituted for the endless punishment of sinners as a means of righteous forgiveness of sin, when the conditions of repentance and the committal of faith are executed. So here we see what really was substituted with your damnation. That, we saw hell was the penalty of the law. The cross is a substitute for hell. But it wasn't just being beaten or having his beard plucked out or his back ripped open or his hands and his feet pierced. But such agony of soul. Such agony that was literally unbearable. He could not live under this agony. And it broke his heart, ruptured his heart under such emotional stress that it ripped and it teared. And he died as a result of that agony. That is what it cost God to atone for your sin. That is what took the place of your damnation. So Christ in his suffering and his death is an adequate substitute for the eternal torment and damnation of hell. Hell is not just physical either. Hell is emotional pain, mental pain, not just physical suffering, suffering of the soul. So Jesus, to substitute that, didn't just have physical suffering, but a suffering of the soul. So, what's the medical and scriptural cause for the death of Christ? What killed Jesus? Jesus died of a broken. That's a good meditation for the day. And it's 5 to 11, or maybe we have 2-3 minutes. Is there any questions before we conclude today's lectures?
I'm thinking he certainly knew the Psalms, So he knew Psalm 69, he knew Psalm 27, so really be burdened something if you know in advance that you're probably going to be dying from a broken heart. Okay?
Oh, I'm sure he knew, yeah.
So, you got that vinegar verse, He certainly knew that.
Yeah, another theory Gordon Olson had was that when Jesus prayed, let this cup pass from me, that Jesus was actually worried that they were going to come and stone him.
Right.
And stoning would have been not a proper atonement either, because he had to really endure agony for a duration of time, and stoning is quick and sudden. And so when he prayed, then God put a preference in their mind for a crucifixion, which was not the usual method for Jews to use. But I don't particularly subscribe to that theory. I believe what Jesus prayed for was this agony he was enduring in this cup he was currently drinking from, that he prayed, and it says his prayer was heard. And so he knew what was coming. The cross had been prophesied by the life of Christ before the garden. So I think that that before the garden, Jesus knew he would die by crucifixion. As the serpent was lifted up in the desert, so the Son of Man would be lifted up, signifying by what death he would take. He said, unless you pick up your cross and follow me. So he used the language of the cross. So he knew the real cost of it. So that's one thing. So Jesus knew that the cross was coming. Yeah.
I was talking with Gloria last night. We were talking about the unforgivable sin that I mentioned.
Yeah.
And this is talking about, the substitution penalty.
Right.
Is there an unforgivable sin that this is?
Well, there is an unforgivable sin. When Jesus was doing these miracles, the Pharisees, who now their religious system is being threatened by this carpenter, they are Pharisees for the sake of the money and the praise and the social status. And then here comes this carpenter who's rebuking them and calling them names and exposing them. So they have a personal bias against Jesus. Even though he's doing the mighty works of God, they know he's doing these great works, and they still say, no, he has a devil, is what he has. He's doing these works of the devil. And I believe that they knew that he was doing the works of God. But they credited the works of God to the devil for their own selfish, sinful purposes. So Jesus then talked about, blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, which is the unforgivable sin, when you are crediting what you know to be the works of God to the devil. And so I think that what that signifies is such a hard, selfish heart in rebellion against God, that when you get to that state of heart, your situation is hopeless. Like what I believe the devils who rebelled against God, having such knowledge of him, that their hearts are so hardened against God, their situation is hopeless. So that's the unforgivable sin, when you are in such a wicked state of mind and of heart that you would even credit the obvious works of God to the devil. So, thanks for watching our video. I pray that it was a blessing to your life and that you were edified and encouraged by it. Please be sure to like it and leave a comment. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and share our videos with your friends. I've been traveling the country for over 14 years, taking the gospel to the lost, to those who need it the most, because America is in big trouble and is in need of the gospel more than ever before. All it takes to bring me to your area is a plane ticket and a couch to sleep on, and we could preach together, or I could preach in your area. But please be sure to keep us in your prayers. We're in need of prayer partners who will get behind us as we're doing battle on the front lines and the devil comes against us. We need Christians who will pray daily for us and for our ministry. And so would you consider becoming a prayer partner with us? Also, we live by faith as a missionary family. We don't know every month where our support's going to come from, but God puts it on people's hearts and He's faithful to provide. And so if God puts it on your heart to bless our ministry and to become a financial supporter, you can do that if you go to our website, openairoutreach.com. So God bless you guys.